University of Phoenix, and also your moderator for this session. I want to take the time to thank each of you for joining us for day two of the University of Phoenix Leadership Summit. During our time together, we will focus on how individuals in leadership and management can implement inclusive leadership practices by addressing emotional and structural barriers within the workplace. In this session, participants will hear from five practicing inclusive leaders on how they address emotional and structural barriers within their work environments. We will hear from each leader individually. Then we will follow with an engaging panel discussion and question and answer format from our participants. So let's begin. Our first speaker we have with us today is Dr. S. Kent Butler Jr., National Certified Counselor, National School Certified Counselor. Dr. Butler is a professor of counselor education at the University of Central Florida. Dr. Butler has over 23 years as a counselor educator, researcher, advocate, and consultant. Dr. Butler formerly served the University of Central Florida as the interim Chief Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Officer and is a National Association of Chief Diversity Officer in Higher Education Fellow. Dr. Butler is the co-owner and founder of Uncaged Coaching and Consulting, whose mission is to globally support marginalized populations. Dr. Butler presently serves as the president of the American Counseling Association. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Butler.
Hotep. And I share with you that I feel really old right now with that 23-year knocked out there into the park. So anyway, hello, everyone. I hope everyone is well. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about my thoughts on leadership and the development of individuals. So my mantra, one of the things I use all the time when I go into conversations with people about leadership is the only thing that's necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. And so it is my job and the job of those who are looking to work forward what's happening in the world for others to make sure that we stamp out evil. We talk about a lot of different things. I came across this passage some years ago when I first started teaching, actually, and it talks about how do we show up in the world? What acts of wickedness would we inflict on someone merely because we did not get our way? I want to move away from the wickedness, and I want to move to the fact that there is artistry and solace in everything and everyone, and that we need to allow them to feed us. That's what inclusivity is. I came across the word privilege not too long ago, and if you look at the definition for privilege, you'll see exactly what that is, right? That it's about having special rights and advantages. But while I was looking at that word one day, and I'm not a linguist by any stretch of the imagination, but I looked at the word and stuck right in the middle of the word was the word vile. And what I'm saying to that is that words matter. And if in the middle of privilege, when people use it in such vile and wicked ways, we need to take stock in recognizing what that means and how we can move forward and make sure that there's equity and that we don't use our privilege in vile ways, regardless of how we come to our privilege. So we need to step outside of our comfort zone. So as a leader, I'm helping people to move away from the fear zone, go into a learning zone, and find a way to grow. And in that growth, know how they can actually be inclusive and integrate with other individuals. Very much like the becoming anti-racist, this conceptual framework works the same as the stepping outside of your comfort zone. We need to move away from fear. We need to learn from others. And in that learning process, we grow. So there's something to be said about power. How are we using power? In leadership, how are we using power? How are we making sure that others are at the table who are not necessarily always at the table, or voices are not being heard? What are we doing with our power? We understand that power is the ability to coerce someone else's behavior. But what are we doing when we have positions of leadership to include others? that we can include access to social, political, and economic resources, that we use our power appropriately so that it doesn't necessarily mimic what goes on in the dominant culture, that other people can live their authentic selves, be their own vulnerable selves in that leadership process. And what they do to ensure that it normalizes throughout our beings, throughout our organizations. So I bring you to this other slide, and I ask you, in your leadership, what are you doing to ensure that you're not discriminating against others, that you're not oppressing or marginalizing them, that you're not exploiting what they bring to the table, and that you're not helping to disenfranchise them from the process, from being good leaders? How are you targeting them? Are you building them up and allowing them to be their greater selves? In the Black community, we say, let them be great. And we work to making sure that everybody is able to do what they have brought themselves to the table to do, giving them access. What does your org chart look like? I'm a part of the American Counseling Association. I am the second African-American man, and the first African-American man was president of our association over 20 years ago. What did that say about access? Our organization actually looked a lot like this org chart. But what are we doing to make sure that our org charts are not just what people doing the worker bee work, that lower level, the people who look like you and me, perhaps, who are just able to get to a certain part of the ceiling, but never, ever at the top, being able to do the work. So when we get to the work, we need to be able to showcase that we are right to be there, that we have the access and the ability to show up as phenomenal leaders. So dominant culture needs to ask themselves, those who holds the power, who gets the best jobs, whose history is taught in schools. Very critical right now, because what we're talking about is how people can find themselves in the literature, find themselves in spaces so they can feel included. Whose relationships are validated in society? That matters. When we look at how individuals are working, what are their feelings and what their beliefs, we have to come to our people who are working for us from the individual level. We need to meet with them from the interpersonal space as well, and how they fit into the institution, and how that deals with where we are socially and culturally. That absolutely matters in how you grow and show you are a strong leader within your organization. I want to bring your attention to a drawing that my daughter, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and when she was 8, she drew this picture. To me, it talks about inclusivity, because me and my wife, we asked her, what is it about this picture that you're sharing that you want to, what does it speak to? And in our conversation, she says, well, whites get to grow and be together. Now, remind you that this is during the pandemic, all the things that were going on in Black and brown communities. And she was like, whites get to hang out and love each other and be together, while Blacks, their hearts are breaking. And I really could not deal with that. Right? I'm like looking at her and my wife, and we're talking with her, and we're really concerned about what's going on. And so she says to me, I asked her, what did the BLM stand for? She says, well, the B is Black, for Black people. And the L is red, for their blood. And the M is for brown people. So I want you to know that as we teach our young people how to grow in leadership, we have to recognize that they see the world. And if we show them the barriers can't be crossed, and they can't be getting through those barriers to find themselves in leadership positions, what are we saying to them? So it becomes important for we to come together and break the chains that bind. My goal in leadership is to ensure that everyone around the table has an opportunity to grow. And so in growing, we are working together on a common mission to help support whatever it is that our leadership and our business is working to do. And so with that, I'm going to pull back and allow our next speaker to have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Butler. You gave us a lot, and your daughter gave us a lot to think about as well. And so I want to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is President Nunez, Christine F. Nunez, MBA, MS, LCSW. President Nunez is a licensed clinical social worker, consultant, and woman minority business owner. Nunez also has over 20 years of experience advocating for children's and women's issues. As an advocate for social justice and mental health policy, she took up the role as chair of the Mayor's Commission on Disability Issues and co-authored a community survey on police response to crisis. Nunez is also the president of NOW, the National Organization for Women, which is the largest organization of feminist grassroots activists in the United States. Please help me in welcoming President Nunez.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here with you all today and just this wonderful panel and to address the importance of structural and emotional barriers to inclusive leadership. I always like to tell everyone that I'm a storyteller and I really like to talk about these topics, but always kind of going into storytelling and then connecting them to the topic. So as I start off talking about this, it's really, I think as a Black woman in a leadership position, I think it's always important to first talk about why this is so important to BIPOC leaders, Black, Indigenous, people of color, first generation college students who are becoming leaders, adult learners who are also becoming leaders, but also myself and my own journey and how it intersects with this topic. So I want to tell a little bit about my story and then connect it to this topic. By starting off with the fact that I have two siblings and my parents, a little bit about my parents, who didn't have the opportunity to grow up and attend or graduate from high school due to economic disadvantages they experienced in the civil rights movement. My mother was a teen mother, brilliant woman, very brilliant woman, but was not allowed to graduate high school, although she had all her credits because she was 15 and pregnant. She was forced to get her GED, and her dream to become a doctor was deferred because a young teen Black woman with a child was unimaginable during the 70s. And my father, living in the deep South Louisiana, was raised by his grandparents and his mother, but also had to drop out of school in 9th grade to financially support his mother and sister. And he also a very intelligent person, but he had to work service jobs to provide for his family. And he never really had the opportunity to dream outside of just surviving. And the reason why I think this story is so important, because this has a lot to do, I think, when we start with education and leadership, of what we're putting in the mindset of Black and Brown and Indigenous students and their quest and their legacy to become leaders. And this begins with our role and our responsibility. I myself am my father's first child, my mother's second child. I'm the first to graduate from my family with a high school diploma, the first to attend in college and 4-year university, the first to attend and earn 2 master's degrees, and the first in my family to lead a national organization as a president and CEO of an organization, all by the age of 42. But this journey was not easy, right? I think all of us can imagine this. Just like my father and my mother, 20 years later, I still had people telling me no. Still had people telling me that this leadership path was not meant for me as a Black woman, that I should choose something easier. I still walked into interviews because when my name was told, my maiden name was Johnson. So when they heard Christian Johnson, they assumed I was a male. And when they saw my resume, they thought I was oppressive. When they saw my Black face, they would tell me, try for something less. So this was the constant experience of racial and gender discrimination I faced as a Black woman who had the experience and the leadership to have leadership positions, but were turned around and told something different because my experience and intersections of my racism and sexism were the barriers that prevented me from actually having the leadership that I well so deserved from my education. And there are still things today, even though I'm running a multi-million-dollar national nonprofit, that I still experience every single day, right? The intersections of racism and sexism. These are real barriers to inclusive leadership. And there are real barriers that I have to constantly challenge my organization and external coalition partners to face as we push back against daily. So Maya Angelou says something very important. I love Maya Angelou, and bless her soul and rest her soul in peace, continued, that she says prejudice is a burden that confuses the past and threatens the future and renders the present inaccessible. And it's so important that we talk about this, because when we talk about addressing emotional barriers and structural barriers, we cannot have this conversation or honest conversation about this if we do not address the impact of structural racism and sexism on the holistic and emotional health of BIPOC leaders and learners. And I think it's so important. When I say BIPOC, I want to break it down. It says Black, Indigenous persons of color, and Latin A persons of color. We need to understand what people are facing every day on their journey to work and while at work and while learning and leading. It goes from micro to macro aggressions. It goes from not being supported while in the office. It goes from being challenged while in the office. And a lot of times we want to place a lot of that responsibility on that leader, but we have to take a real full responsibility at the top level of our institutions of how we are challenging our own policies and practices to create safe spaces and environments for those individuals to learn and lead successfully in safe spaces. We have to learn to start moving away from status quos that is absolutely essential to disrupting the patriarchy of systems, and white patriarchy I'm talking about, and racism and oppressive systems that we all permeate in our workplaces, and sometimes resonate in us subconsciously that we don't even recognize, right? And prevent inclusion, but also sometimes enable exclusion and racial and gender trauma that we see in workplaces in our daily lives. So inclusion is an everyday choice that we have to make. It is an everyday evaluation that we have to make, and we can no longer be performative in that work. We can no longer be performative at work in our leadership by just saying things, saying quotes, saying hashtags, only doing leadership or DEI training once a year or a retreat. That is not enough. We have to break it down to the very core of what we're doing. And we can't just call out things that are wrong, but we have to start calling in consciousness and respect to leaders who have thought hard and worked hard to achieve the work that they've done to get to the level of leadership they are at. So we should also automatically know better about certain things, right? We should know better that some things are just not allowed to be in the workplace, like talking about race and culture, sexual orientation, gender opinions in the workplace. They're not needed and they don't need to be there. And so we have to start challenging when we see these things happening to certain communities. Why are we accepting it? Why are we accepting people to talk about Black women's hair? Why are we accepting having people question our LGBTQIA individuals and colleagues about their sexual orientation status or their gender, and our non-binary leaders about their gender? These are experiences of micro or macro aggressions that create structural and emotional barriers and have an impact on work productivity and have an impact on creating safe spaces for work. So it's our importance and our responsibility to make shifts not only in DEI work, but part of DEI work was above that. It's in our hiring practices, right? It's in incorporating racial and gender equity and parity. That is from our pay. That is from how we hire, what we look like, leading, like Kim mentioned earlier, is like, what does your board look like? Your hierarchy. From the top and the bottom, are we analyzing and really looking at what this truly looks like, and are we reflective of true inclusion? And also making sure that we're disabling emotional workplace toxicity. It is not just the responsibility of the employee or the senior level leader to do that work. It has to be a complete cultural shift. And it has to definitely start out from the very top, from the board, to implement these changes to the CEO, to the senior leader, and forward down. So we must recognize that these barriers cannot resolve. Also, if we're only working for solutions to inclusion and piecemeal. So I think this is a great conversation, but I just want to share that point to get started. And I'm going to turn it over to the next wonderful panelist. Thank you.
It seems that we lost the net. And so I think, Masil, you're next. Would you want to introduce yourself and just go ahead in?
I do. And I thank you for that. My name is Masil Johnson. I'm Vice President of Accreditation and Regulatory Compliance at the University of Phoenix. And I've been in higher ed 17 years and enjoy what I do. My focus has always been compliance and legal affairs. I want to give a quick shout out to my mom who's watching today and also my team who's on as well. So thank you all for being here. And I'm getting ready to share a quick video with you regarding just an exercise and how we can think about diversity differently.
In a small community, a giraffe designed and built a new and exquisite home, especially for his family's needs. It was a home ideally suited for giraffes, with high windows that ensured maximum light and good views, while protecting the family's privacy. It had magnificent soaring ceilings, tall, stately doorways, and elegant, narrow hallways that saved valuable space without compromising convenience. The home was so wonderful, it even won the National Giraffe Home of the Year award. The giraffe enjoyed the home and went as far as to move his prestigious woodworking business into the home's spacious basement. Of course, the giraffe was settled for nothing less than a state-of-the-art workshop. So remarkable and advanced was the equipment in this shop, and so skilled a craftsman was the giraffe, that the giraffe's business quickly became the talk of the woodworking industry. Unfortunately, the giraffe's growing popularity began to take its toll, and it became very difficult to keep up with mounting orders. Most days, it was all the giraffe could do to take a break or steal a breath of fresh air.
I'll never get all this work done on time. I could lose clients.
But it was during one brief break that the giraffe happened to notice another well-known craftsman strolling down the street.
I know that elephant. We worked together building a play area for the elementary school last year. He's smart, organized, and an excellent woodworker. I wonder if the elephant would work with me. I need somebody to help me, someone skilled that I can depend on. Hello, elephant. Good day to you. If you have some time, would you like to come in? There's something I'd like to discuss.
Oh, yes, it would be my pleasure, Giraffe.
The elephant was delighted with the invitation. He had enjoyed working with the giraffe in the past, had heard of Giraffe's wood shop, and liked the idea of getting to know the giraffe better.
Well, come in. Come in.
Well, thank you. I've always wanted to see your home and workshop.
But when the elephant tried to enter, he immediately encountered a problem.
This doorway, the doorway's a bit, I believe I'm stuck.
Oh, dear. It's a good thing I put this doorway on double hinges. It's so I can bring in my equipment. This'll just take a moment. Sorry about that.
Thanks, Giraffe.
Soon, the two acquaintances were happily exchanging woodworking stories, and their appreciation of each other's skill grew by leaps and bounds.
Oh, that's wonderful, elephant. Beautifully done.
This equipment sure makes it easy.
It was obvious that they got along very well. So well, in fact, that the giraffe offered the elephant a partnership on the spot. The elephant quickly accepted. Work with the giraffe would not only elevate his status in the industry, but would clearly increase his income.
Honey, telephone.
Coming! Oh, excuse me. I better take that in my den.
Oh, of course. Well, I guess I'll get started.
That would be great. My workspace is now your workspace.
Left alone, the elephant looked around and noticed a room full of raw wood.
Say, I'll bet there's some more cherry wood in there.
So he decided to investigate.
Uh-oh, this is not good. I better tell Giraffe. Oh,
The elephant was very frustrated.
Good heavens, Elephant. What happened? Are you all right?
I'm very sorry, Giraffe. I was trying to get right to work and,
Oh, I see the problem. That door was too narrow again. I guess we'll have to make you more flexible.
what?
Great. Thank you for letting me share that video. I have a few slides I want to talk through. And the short story is, when folks ask, why are we still talking about diversity? That was a brilliant video done by R. Roosevelt Thomas Jr. And he did very intense studies about diversity and profiled the fable using the giraffe and the elephant. And I think sometimes we think of it as what's the elephant in the room, right? And so I think the key for us is to think about, how did the video remind you of various challenges you may have faced in your life? Were there times where you felt like the outsider, maybe not the insider? And those are the things that I think we need to think about, is that the lens of how we think about things is what is sometimes we need to consider. And even for the elephant, he was warmly invited in, as you can imagine, when he started trying to move around to work. That's when things became a little challenging. And so some things that were overlooked in the video were the similarities between the two. Because once we realized there were differences, then we immediately zoned in on the differences. And so one of the things we have to think about is, what is your role in acknowledging diversity and inclusion and equity? You have to acknowledge your role. And I think sometimes people say, well, whose job is it to fix it? I'm tired of this. Well, it's all of our job to fix it. It's like when Sholo Richards says, is the raindrop at fault for the flood? When we look at that through the lens of civility, we all have to self-reflect and say, how can I make the world better? What can I do to improve our society? So then the next thing you have to do is examine your attitude. And if you have a yes answer to any of the following questions, then what it says is you might need more training, or you might need to think about exploring things through a different lens. And so one of the questions says, do I see discussions about alternative ways of doing things as a waste of time? And so if you answer yes to that, then maybe you need to think about inclusivity training. Does change make me uncomfortable? I think we can all answer yes to that question, right? And so you want to think about change management workshops. Then these are the three things I want you to focus on. Acknowledge your role in making a change or making a difference, and then examine your attitude. And then engage in continuous learning, and then take time to reflect and say, how can I be better? And so these are some great tips I wanted to share with you, is how the best become better. And this is from John Gordon's book, Training Camp. And he says, the best do ordinary things better than anyone. And the best know what they truly want. So you have to think about, what do I want? Do I want to make things better? And then you have to think about, what do I want to have as my legacy? And that's the key too. And the other thing about the best is the best make everyone around them greater. And so you have to think about, as I'm living and doing what my work is, what am I passionate about? And what is it that I really want to do? And how can I do that better? And then in closing, I just want to share with you, and thinking about this, I was able to create a short story about Kitty and the Squirrel. It's a book about change. And so one of the things I would encourage all of you on this call to do is think about what it is that you're really passionate about, and really plug into that and really get going on that, because that's what's going to really help you turn the dial and just remain positive in your focus and in thinking about your legacy. And your legacy is to help make the world a better place. Then we all play a role in that. And I think that's my 10 minutes.
Thank you so much, Vice President Johnson. I did get kicked out a little bit, but I do want to go back and say who everyone had an opportunity to hear from. So you had an opportunity to hear from Vice President Maxille Johnson, JD. As you can see, she has over 20 years of professional experience that she gained in areas of compliance, diversity, and legal affairs. Vice President Johnson prides herself on being a servant leader who enjoys helping others achieve their professional goals and ascend to new heights. To that end, Vice President Johnson is a well sought after compliance consultant for higher education institutions. Johnson is the Vice President of the University of Phoenix Accreditation and Regulatory Compliance. Once again, thank you so much, Vice President Johnson, for sharing a very creative presentation with us. So as we move forward along with our panelists, I want to introduce you to President Hudson. Rose J. Hudson holds a degree in urban studies and public policy, a master's in public administration with a specialization in human resource management, as well as the Society of Human Resource Management's designation, Senior Certified Professional. In Hudson's 16-year tenure at the lottery's helm coincides with upward sales trends, lending to her election into Public Gaming Research Institute's Lottery Industry Hall of Fame in 2016, and the lottery seeing its best year ever for K-12 public education contributions in 2021. Hudson has served as president of both the North American Association of State and Provincial Lotteries and the Multi-State Lottery Association, where she also chaired its Powerball game group. Throughout her professional career, she has received numerous awards to include Dillard's University's Diller Award of Excellence, LSU's Public Administration Institute's Alumnus of the Year, National Diversity Council's Most Powerful and Influential Women in Louisiana designation, and an induction into LSU's E.J. Orso College of Business Hall of Distinction. Hudson is currently serving as the Louisiana Lottery Corporation President and CEO. Please help me welcome President Hudson.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the University of Phoenix for having me, and thanks for having a practitioner here in the business world alongside this distinguished group of folks who are actually doing the DE&I work. So I'm honored to be with you all today. I think the 4,000 plus attendance speaks to the emerging importance of inclusive leadership in today's business world. My presentation this afternoon focuses on removing emotional and structural barriers, but there really isn't an how-to for that. In fact, I'm not going to try to tell you how to do it, because I believe if we foster a paradigm shift from standardization to personalization in leadership and human resources management, we will naturally remove emotional and structural barriers. So long before the pandemic, personalization was a key marketing and distribution buzzword. Consumers no longer wanted what everyone else had. With the explosion of social media, they wanted to express their individuality on every level. Coke understood the concept when it launched personalized Coke bottles. Nike got it with the advent of their online design studio, Nike by You, where you could build your own sneaker. Lit Pizza understood it by allowing you to watch as your personalized masterpiece is constructed and cooked before your eyes. The growth and popularity of Ancestry.com and related DNA services show us on paper how unique we truly are. And we are proud of that individuality. Gone are the days when marketers can give us a one-size-fits-all product and we're happy with it. Statistically, as a society, we are more diverse than ever. With social media and a 24-hour news cycle, we are also more informed than ever. So, welcome to the age of personalization in business, a shift from standardization. The shift from standardization to personalization does not stop with consumers. Those consumers are also employees who are making the same demands in their workplace. They want to influence the workplace and marketplace in their own way. They don't want to draw a line between the real self and the work self. We saw personalization make huge inroads during the pandemic as technology allowed work situations to become more customized to the individual. We also experienced this during times of social strife that followed as employees questioned value systems and worked through shared emotional toil. The personalization paradigm shift in human resources and business leadership is upon us. So what does this mean for today's leader? In his book, Leadership in the Age of Personalization, Glenn Lopez notes that most leaders were trained in the age of standardization, an age when the business defined the individual, when bosses told people what to do inside the box they were given, when progress toward the bottom line was all that mattered, when everyone was treated equally according to their role or position in a hierarchy. But these methods don't work in the age of me, an age in which the individual defines the business. Although corporate and leadership strategies were not designed to handle mass variance in people, that's exactly what they need to be doing now. To thrive, leaders must be able to harness individual capacities, and that requires, you guessed it, fully embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. In moving past standardization, leaders must measure and amplify individual impact. Leaders must value and seek interdependence across the enterprise. These are new skills for a new age. Please excuse me. True, we still need some basic standardization, but the age of personalization is forcing us to rethink what those standards are so we can better lead our employees and serve our customers. So how do we embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion in leadership? Well, we put people first. For growth, we often think about standardization and economies of scale. Created fairness becomes exclusive. Inclusion means embracing differences. So treating everyone equally is not necessarily what creates inclusion. But we need to know what those differences are. What barriers exist? Transportation, education, family structure, personal crises. How do we do that? By taking care of people first. Financial results, well, they follow. I believe that. Address the whole employee, not just the part of them that delivers the work product. Meet people where they are. Think about it. During the pandemic, we destigmatized having kids in rooms while on Zoom calls. The diversity movement reminds us that we are all different. As a very simple exercise, you are unlikely to find someone in the same room at work wearing the same shoes as you. The shoes that you like are not likely worn by others, even in your same social network. But much more profound than shoes, individuals differ in their demographics, race, gender, age, education, and lifestyle. I am so sorry. Professional ambitions ranging from high to low aspirations and personal goals, definitions of success. True, we still need some basic standardization, But the age of personalization is forcing us to rethink what those standards are so we can better lead our employees and serve our customers. David Ulrich, the Rensis Leiker professor at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, says, we can think of each person's personalization in different facets: emotion, empathy, engagement, experience, and efficacy. Be emotionally aware and lead with empathy. Employees are looking for authentic, transparent, and compassionate interactions with leaders. When the pandemic's physical challenges came, the emotional needs of the afflicted and those associated with them mattered as much as physical needs. Organizations can and should become communities where employees find resources that provide personal emotional support. Empathetic leadership will hopefully be the new norm as leaders more fully listen to and hear their employees. With empathy, respecting differences is less an event where we proclaim our commitment to diversity and more an ongoing habit. But before we can empathize, we need to be emotionally aware of our own feelings and what we bring to our interactions. Take the opportunity to engage. During the pandemic, we engaged with coworkers and families and friends through technology in more meaningful ways. We got a sneak peek into others' personal spaces and talked about more meaningful and deeper topics. Technology encourages social distancing, but not necessarily isolation. The more we engage with others, the more we learn about them. Ask employees what is important to them, what matters. We ask that of our customers, why not our employees? What is each employee's unique thing that enhances the company? Learning about others allows leaders to activate the full capacity of the individual in front of them in any given moment. Answers to these questions will allow you to see what emotional and structural barriers exist to their achieving full capacity. Create shared experiences. Employee experience has become a critical element of the work experience as employees believe, find meaning, become, learn and grow, and belong, connect with others. Employee experience is a lead indicator of customer experience and investor confidence. Personalization at work means that while different, everyone has something to offer to help the collective organization or community become more than the individual parts. That offering may be a perspective, skill, or experience. Leaders who appreciate diversity and yet established unity through appreciation for differences and shared experiences create adaptive, innovative, and agile organizations. Redefine efficacy with a personalized approach. With the increased turmoil recently, many have had to discover their personal efficacy by defining and redefining what success means. Instead of tracking public activity via the meetings attended, flights taken, goals accomplished, success has become more about private reflections on values recognized and realized, caring for and reaching out to others, and learning new skills. The great resignation may be a result of this redefining efficacy when you feel it can no longer be achieved on the job. So, leaders shouldn't start by telling others what to do, but discover what matters to each employee and then help each employee recognize that he or she can meet personal goals by engaging in the collective organizational goals. Leaders can assume that others may want what they want and act the way they would act. However, a leader with the ambition to be promoted, for example, may have to recognize that someone else may want more time off for personal reasons. Instead of this leader assuming others will have his or her ambition, he or she can help others reach their goals through their unique contribution to the organization. Personalization at work attends to the personal uniqueness of each individual. Here are some opportunities for you to create a culture of personalization. Look through these and think through them. What would you add? What does personalization mean at the organizational level? Well, it means we move from attention to benchmarking, where leaders compare their organization to others, and best practices, to guidance, where leaders focus on what matters most to the organization. Comparing an organization's human capital or investments with another is no longer enough. Leaders need to define their organization's unique human capital requirements based on their personal outcome. Although an organization could be working to redefine their strategy from product to service or to more digital platform, you may have different human capital requirements than another organization. But a reframing of the focus on human capital in a personalized way can still be a North Star. When thinking about this session, I was asked, what is one thing I wanted everyone to walk away with? Well, here it is on the screen. A greater awareness, understanding, and empathy for our colleagues with regards to the challenges each faces, as well as a few strategies for recognizing and eliminating the barriers to our collective and inclusive excellence. I hope I've had some success there. I appreciate your attendance, your attention, and once again, thank you so much for allowing me to share with you today.
Thank you so much, President Hudson, for reminding us of the importance of engagement in the workplace and building community. So last but definitely not least on our panel is Dr. Laverne Haynes Collins, National Certified Counselor, Approved Clinical Supervisor, Board Certified Telemental Health, Licensed Professional Counselor, Licensed Clinical Mental Health Counselor. Dr. Collins has over 25 years of professional experience as a counselor, trainer, consultant, author, and speaker. Her career history includes serving as a program director for the National Board for Certified Counselors Foundation and interim vice president for the National Board of Certified Counselors Foundational and Professional Services Division. Dr. Collins owns an Atlanta-based practice and training agency, New Seasons Counseling, Training, and Consulting LLC, and is the co-owner of Equity Training Partners LLC, which focuses on providing customized learning and coaching solutions that promotes a sustainable and anti-discrimination culture in organizations and societal structures. Dr. Collins' work is featured in a monthly column in Counseling Today magazine, where the series focus is on honoring diversity. Dr. Collins currently serves on the Industry Advisory Council for the University of Phoenix College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. Please help me welcome Dr. Collins.
Thank you, Dr. Bergsteiner. And I've so enjoyed all of the presentations that have gone forth so far. I do come from a unique perspective because I come from the standpoint of mental health as a counselor, but I also come from the standpoint of being a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and strategist. So I see both the organizational side of racism and discrimination in the workplace. Then I see the effects and the psychological and interpersonal struggles of people who come to me for counseling. And with that in mind today, I'm talking to you just briefly about the disenfranchised grief of workplace racism. So here we have somewhat of an intersection, the intersection of the psychological effects and the organizational effects of racism in the workplace. Now, we're not doing a poll today, but if I was to poll this audience and ask how many people want to see more violence in our nation's schools, everyone, I believe, would say, no, we don't want to see that. If I said, how many of us want to see more violence in our nation's communities? Everyone would say, no, we don't want more violence in the community. If I said, now, how many of us want to see more violence in our workplaces? Hopefully you would all say no. Here's the thing that I need you to walk away from as the thesis, so to speak, of this brief talk I have today. And that is that the workplace becomes a place of psychological violence and disenfranchised grief when racism in the workplace goes unaddressed. Let me say that again. The workplace becomes a place of psychological violence and disenfranchised grief when racism in the workplace goes unaddressed. So many people would say, well, you know, how much racism or how much discrimination is really experienced by the majority of people today. Well, let me just give you a couple research-based statistics that you can jot down and chew on. Gallup.com in January of last year reported that 1 in 4 Black workers reported discrimination at work. 1 out of 4, 25%. BusinessInsider.com in February of 2020 said that 42% of US employees have witnessed or experienced discrimination based on their age, race, gender, or LGBTQ identity. That's 42% of US employees. US News says in May of last year, a survey found significant percentages of workers of color saying they had been treated unfairly at work. And then thehill.com reported in February of 2020, just about 2 years ago, that 60% of Americans have seen or been a victim of discrimination at work. Those statistics should be upsetting. They should be staggering. But only when we see racism as psychological violence will we embrace what's actually needed at more than a checklist kind of a level. We have to go beyond that. We have to go beyond bringing in training so we can check off that we did the DEI training. If we want a nonviolent workplace, we will have to take a stand against even the most subtle forms of violence in the workplace. And one of the ways in which we do that is by recognizing that there indeed are gender differences in how people experience racism. Men report that they experience, Black men particularly, report that they experience more violence in the workplace, in healthcare, and in the legal system. Whereas African-American women, for instance, report experiencing more racism and discrimination in social and cultural venues. Black men are generally seen as being more violent, more aggressive, and interestingly, Black women are typically seen as being better educated. So it behooves us to do the research to explore how our biases and how our expectations of other people might subtly affect how we interact with them, how we promote from within. They may subtly support acts of discriminatory practices that we need to be trying to avoid. We need to also recognize that definitions not just of racism differ, but definitions of uh, uh, depression and mental health challenges differ by gender and by race. And most of the work I do is on African American studies, so I'm using African Americans for most of my examples today. But these need to be considered as part of the global BIPOC challenge in our world today. And one of the things that stands out is that research shows that African American men do have have different definitions of what depression feels like. Now, we have in the mental health field, we have a standard checklist of symptoms and features that represent the presence of depressive symptoms that would qualify a person to have a diagnosis of depression. And that's like that with anxiety or any other challenges. But what we find is that how African American men define those symptoms is different. And the way that African American men define those symptoms is different from the standard way that we ask questions in, say, depression screening instruments and in diagnostic tests. So we are missing a segment of the population that is, remember now, experiencing higher levels of discrimination and racism in the workplace, in the medical system, and in the legal system. But we don't know how to measure that in a way that captures how they define depression. And what's interesting, you're going to talk about this in the bottom line of your organizations. Depression is one of the number one causes of people going on disability. So you owe it to society, you owe it to your fellow man, but you also owe it to your stakeholders and your bottom line to create a work environment that does not add to the absenteeism and the disability claims and the poor mental health outcomes of your employees. The third thing I'll say is that racism, discrimination, and microaggressions don't just happen at the interpersonal level. They also happen at the environmental level. I can think about so many times I've walked down corridors of hospitals and I've seen the plaques and the pictures of the most important people to this hospital, whatever they may be, donors, board members, former presidents, CEOs, whatever. And as I would walk down the corridors of these hospitals, and sometimes even in educational institutions, I see pictures of people that don't look like me. I see, and I don't see anybody that looks like me. And that suggests, it brings to mind the question, put it that way. Do I belong here? Do I fit in here? Who and what is valued here? All that to say that we end up with a scenario where people are living with disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss. Very briefly, let me explain what I mean by disenfranchised grief and ambiguous loss. Disenfranchised grief occurs when the general public, when other people don't have an understanding of what you're grieving or what you've lost. Ambiguous loss is the very loss of things that others don't see or wouldn't recognize. So where and how do you grieve the loss of opportunities that are caused by the racial identity that you have? How do you grieve the burden of suspicion that is on your race in the workplace and in the community? How do you grieve the loss of dignity that occurs when there are racial slights? All of those things are ambiguous losses that bring about disenfranchised grief. And all grief, if unrecognized, can lead to depression and can even in some cases lead to suicidal ideations. Say all this to say that we owe it to ourselves to pay attention to ways in which we may be contributing to the disenfranchised grieving experiences, the experiences that other people don't recognize, that you would never think of, and the loss that accompanies the experience of racism. It's our obligation as leaders in the workplace, in the community, in government, in healthcare, in all branches and dimensions and domains of life to do our best to prevent this kind of workplace disability for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Those are my thoughts I leave with you today, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Collins, and to all of our panelists today. So now that we've had an opportunity to hear from our panelists, we would like to open up the floor for the next 30 minutes for questions and answers and to hear from our participants. If you have a question, please place it in the chat. If there is a specific panelist that you would like to address your question to, please place their name beside that question and we will ensure that they will provide an answer. So I'm going to open this up once again to our participants, and let's begin if you have any questions. So I see quite a bit of round of applause for our panelists. And once again, thank you so much for the amazing job that you do in your workplaces, and also for providing us with these pearls of wisdom today. So as we're waiting to hear from or get comments or questions from our participants, I will ask a question, and I'll ask this first question. It will go to Vice President Johnson. In terms of when you look at success, how does one actually measure success? And how do one get into the opportunity of creating their own narrative? How would you support someone in creating their own narrative?
Yeah, so thank you for asking that question. I think it's an important thing to do, especially right now, is to really think about where is your passion and what makes you excited about life. And again, it kind of goes back to the slides about what do you want your legacy to be? And I've also heard it said, what do you want the hyphen to represent? It's a short little hyphen between the year you were born and the year you die. But what does that mean? And once you get to the crux of that, then you can really get purposeful about what it is that you really want to do. And so success, we each get to define what our own success is. And we each get to tell our own story. And so often in life, people are telling you who you are and who you should be, but success is defining yourself and creating your own narrative. And I think it's really, really more powerful to do that now than any other time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We have a question here in the chat for Dr. Collins, and it says, can you give an example of a disenfranchised grief and one of ambiguous grief for distinction, please? So one example of disenfranchised grief and one example of ambiguous grief.
Okay. Well, ambiguous loss, actually, and disenfranchised grief. Ambiguous loss is the actual thing that's lost that might actually be difficult for another person to even understand. So the question becomes, well, what was lost? So it's not like if your house burns down and you recognize that there's loss. Okay, that's a direct and definitive identifiable loss. But what about redlining practices that keep you from getting the house that you wanted and you never got it? So someone could say, well, what did you lose? Your house didn't burn down. No, I never even got the house. So the question is, well, what did you lose? Other people won't recognize the loss. Now, disenfranchised grief, grief is the emotion itself. So the disenfranchised grief, an example of that would be how do you grieve the loss of something that society gives no support for, even recognizing as a loss, like the freedom to go into a store and not worry about being followed by security. How do you grieve the loss of respect? How do you grieve that thing that anybody else would look at you and say, I don't understand what the thing is. What is it? It's a loss that's not supported by society. And I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Collins. I have a question here in the chat that anyone can feel free to answer. It says, can you talk a little more about ageism discrimination in the workplace? And why are they not valued as reliable resources? So if anyone wants to address ageism in the workplace.
Again, I think that with ageism in the workplace, I think that you have to redefine your narrative, right? So I think you have to be very purposeful and very careful about how you show up. And one of the things I like is Sholo Richards says, show up as your higher self, your higher, H-I-R-E, how you were when they hired you. And so sometimes we forget what we showed up as when we got hired, but you show up as your best self when you're hired. And so I think it's always being purposeful about what you say. I'll share an example. There was a lady named Debbie, and she was the assistant registrar, and everybody said, oh, Debbie, I bet someday you'll be the registrar. And she said, no, I never want to be the registrar. Marilyn had been the registrar for 30 years. Marilyn retired. Then they offered the job to the nation. Debbie said, I'm totally offended. They never came to me and asked me to be the registrar. Well, Debbie, I said, for 5 years that I knew you, you kept telling everybody you didn't want to be the registrar. So I think you have to be very careful about how you show up and what you say, right? You have to show up with someone that has enthusiasm and someone that's willing to share. And so ageism is something that we all have to deal with. But I think it's showing up and letting people know what your skill set is and what you're available to do. And I think enthusiasm can take you farther than anything in the workplace.
Dr. Bergsteiner, yes, you know, as a member of several boards of directors of other organizations and also an HR person, it's really important that we as leaders make sure we are not sending messages, whether it be in our, you know, through our hiring practices, through our conversation, collateral material, that we are an ageist organization. I say that from a standpoint of having sat in meetings where, you know, someone says, well, make sure you put the word energetic in a job description or in an ad, or making sure that, you know, we don't talk about certain abilities that are society affixes to a person of a certain age. So it's really important that we make sure that we pay attention to, you know, what we're talking about here today is the diversity of all of society and the members and the ability of people to contribute to our organizations without those labels.
Thank you so much, President Hudson, for adding that piece. This is another question that I think kind of goes along in terms of age as well. We have a question in the chat that says, how can we encourage our youth in this time of social media of feeling comfortable in expressing their views around grief or insecurity?
I'd love for you to repeat that.
Yeah. So, and I think what comes to mind to me, particularly when we look in workplaces, at University of Phoenix, for one, we have a Yammer, which is an in-place work social media. And so oftentimes we want to maintain that we're maintaining professional in this space, right? And so the question that is asked is, how can we encourage our youth in this time of social media of feeling comfortable in expressing their views around grief and or security?
So I think we have to provide gracious space for them to be able to share, and we have to allow them to be vulnerable. And sometimes I think that we're always trying to do everything so fast that we don't stop and take a pause, but we have to provide that space where they feel secure and that there's trust so they can come forward and share. And so it's really a case-by-case scenario based on a sort of a common nucleus of operative facts that you're dealing with. But that's what I would suggest, providing that gracious space and making it known to them that communication is key and opening up an opportunity for them to share.
Thank you so much. Now I have another question that goes along with this, and this is for you, Dr. Butler. The question asks, how do you maintain authenticity and remain unapologetically, in spaces that are not always open to individuals speaking their truth?
Well, I find that in many cases, when you're invited into the room, you're invited to stay the same as what people envision you to be. And they want you to show up as they would be comfortable in that particular space. I think that each of us has to learn to dwell on ourselves for a moment and figure out who we are and what do we represent. And how do we want to show up in spaces that sometimes are not open to us. They invite you to the table, and I saw somebody write in the chat, but they don't invite you to dance. They don't invite you to eat. All those different things that might show up when somebody invites you into their home. Very much like the video that we saw. You invite somebody into your home, but you don't make space for them to be there. You don't allow them to be there authentic and the person that they are, who they feel most comfortable being. We have to recognize that each person has a right to be at whatever venue they're invited to be a part of, or wherever they show up. And when they do show up, we have to allow them to be who they are. And we can't put them in a bubble and ask them to be those things that make us stay comfortable. I saw also in the chat someone saying that it depends on what the change is. Well, if somebody's coming in and asking for a change, then that's what the depend is. Somebody is saying, hey, I need to be able to come in and show up in my authentic self, but these barriers are stopping me from doing that. This hair, this brown skin, this clothes that I wear are stopping me from being my authentic self. I have to show up in a way that you are allowing me to show up, or you would want me to show up. And if I don't show up in that manner, then you discount me. And now they're saying cancel, right? You're canceling me out. But we have to allow people to show up. I love the saying in the Black community that talks about let me be great. Well, I want all people to be great. But in order for us to be great, we have to show up and allow ourselves, we have to give ourselves grace to be great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Butler. I have a question here for President Nunez. And it is, what action should leaders prioritize to ensure they're providing the right support for women in the workplace?
Sure. This is a great question. I think for women, we experience so many things that make it difficult for us from various, we have, depending on if you're choosing to have a family, there are already so many different gender issues and barriers we experience. So I definitely believe, even as a woman leader, it's important that we take in consideration the various needs of our women leaders and our women employees, and they are going to vary, and that we don't assume that every woman employee we have has the same needs, and that we have to be that we make sure we're talking to them individually, making sure we're accommodating or according to that person. Some may need extra time because we're still working in somewhat remote times, and then some people still have children in the background, and some may not need that, and some may need additional time for school, and some may need time because they're nursing, and some may not need that, and some may need different accommodations, and some may not need any of those at all. But I think that we need to be considerate that as a woman, we are very diverse in difference, and we cannot assume that every woman has the same direct need or learning style or any of those things. And so we are very diverse in our leadership, very diverse in our learning styles, very diverse in our experience, and we have to go into it that way. I think a lot of times when we get put in boxes and expectations that we have are very narrowed. And so I try my best to just kind of talk to my employees individual and see what they need to make them successful. And everybody's conversation is individualistic to them. It's not, assumed that because we were working for a women's organization, we do have men working in our office, but because we are a women's organization, we are all in the same place, because we are not. So I think it's a very individualistic conversation and making sure we're addressing it that way, because we are individuals with different needs.
Thank you so much. And this next question ties into what you've illustrated, President Nunez. This question is for President Hudson. Being an empathetic leader sounds good in theory, but won't being too empathetic or going too soft on employees lead them to take advantage of situations?
I have to disagree. I think it's everything. Empathetic leadership, when done correctly, empowers our employees. From experience, it shows our employees that we are the organization that cares about them, that takes them seriously, that recognizes their diversity, and it has energized our organization. I can use the pandemic as an example. We had as many employees as we had that many individual situations that required us to lead and manage very differently. And it goes back to the personalization that I talked about earlier. I have the fiscal results of our organization speak to the excellence of the employees, and the excellence of the employees is directly tied to how we have been able to lead with an empathetic ear. It does not take the place of performance. Personalizing that approach does not take the place of what employees are expected to do. But I can recount so many examples of how what I have tried to model for my leaders in the organization in the way of empathetic leadership has borne tremendous fruit for us.
Thank you so much. I have a question, and any of the panelists can answer this or all, but I thought this was an interesting question here in the chat. It says, some of us suffer in corporate America because we have leaders holding a corporate knee on our necks. What advice do any of you have to help not only get out from under the knee, but also strategically help others get released?
Did you say knees on the neck?
Yeah, knees on the neck. Yes, corporate knees on the neck. Yes.
All right. So let me just say this really quickly, and I hope people understand where I'm going with this, right? Because I am not being disrespectful of people who are in leadership or coming from the dominant culture. But what I want people from the dominant culture to understand, and especially white males, is that it doesn't have to be an ethnocentric way of living to ensure that everybody can see and be a part of the experience, right? You don't need to have it stay so comfortable for you that you can't allow somebody who comes from an Asian perspective, from an LGBTQ perspective, from any perspective, to be in a space where they can grow and shine, because they're going to allow you to find your greatness as well. And so the knee on the neck, and that's a very powerful statement to be said in what has happened over the past 2 years. But that knee on the neck stifles productivity. It stifles somebody from being able to find out where they belong and who they are. And it doesn't allow them to breathe into that space their greatness, right? And so that knee on the neck is harmful because it doesn't allow for the air to get in so that it can circulate and be able to evolve into something that is much better, that person has to share and bring. And so when people stop folks from being a part of that, when people are being messy, and that's one of my biggest things this year to say, that I believe that people are messy, that they want things their way, and or they'll go in and they'll do anything to collude and disrupt those things that are stopping other people from being able to get over those barriers. And so that knee on the neck is really you not allowing yourself even to be able to share the glorious stuff that comes from all people. And I'll pull back and let other panelists speak as well.
Yeah. I would like to add what Kent's saying, because I think that's very important, because I think there's this horrible expectation that we have, especially on executive leaders, C-suite leaders, that people have gotten there because they've been so rigid and harsh and hard, and that you have to be this way to get to this level. And when you get at this place, then you have to be so rigid and like kind of cruel, like, in some place, and have that knee on the neck. And you have to not have grace, not have compassion, and you lose that, in this, and when you get to this level of leadership. And that is so far from the truth. And you do not have to be that way. You can still have compassion and understanding, because you have to go through this process of growth and development to get to this position. And I think true leaders and servant leaders and authentic leaders understand that, and they understand the struggle. And especially, I think, as a leader from disenfranchised community or a BIPOC community, you really understand it, because we've lived that experience more. So it makes it easier for us to be empathetic to understanding all of the aggressions, microaggressions and macroaggressions, and what those look like. So for me, it's easier for me to have an open door policy, right? It's easier for me to be able to say, okay, I have a toddler and I'm a working mother as a president and CEO. And so I can look and see, I can understand that dynamic. And I'm also a Black woman. And I'm also, and I can see what that looks like on the sides of sexism in the workplace and racism in the workplace. And I understand the full outlook of that. And I understand the outlook of what that looks like. So why it makes no sense for me to get in this position than to be hard on a person who might have a battle. And I also understand the position of growing up and being in positions where sometimes my family experienced poverty, and sometimes we did not, because we were on that line, where just a couple $100 made the difference at different times and place, where we were sometimes okay and sometimes we weren't. So if I've experienced this narrative and lived experience, it makes, to me, I say that helps me be more compassionate in my leadership, to see when people go through things, I can understand it, and then be able to offer resources and support to help guide my employees to help them be more successful. Because we know research says when employees feel that there's a safe environment for them to thrive, they produce more, they're longer employees, there's longevity in their work, they stay longer, they're happier, they produce better work outcomes. So if that's what I'm looking for, then I have to create that environment for my employees, not become more rigid and harmful, and create a hostile and toxic work environment that's going to run them away and create stress and health factors for them that they're going to have that's just going to push them away. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for to create a positive, healthy, inclusive culture. So I just wanted to kind of add on to that.
If I can add something too, no more would I tell a person to stay in a psychologically violent relationship than I would tell someone to stay in a physically violent relationship. So if you are being physically, psychologically, emotionally abused by an intimate partner, anyone would tell you, start thinking about an exit plan, at a minimum, an emergency plan. I think we do people a disservice to suggest that they need to stay in a psychologically violent or hostile environment that is not culturally congruent or supportive. Now, that being said, any individual leader who operates with a knee in the neck kind of a mentality is not operating on his or her own, on their own. They are operating under the banner of the organizational culture, because that doesn't happen in cultures where that's not tolerated. But the problem is that many boards of directors even don't know what kind of culture they are really overseeing, because they hear the reports from the person who's holding the knee in the neck. So what I say to leaders and boards is, you have to embed the kind of race equity that supports the long-term transformation away from knee in the neck leadership and everyday racism and the resulting grief of that. And you have to do that by knowing your organization. You should be doing research on your organization. You should be assessing. You should be calling in people to do analyses, assess retention, assess employee perceptions, assess your recruitment, your attrition, and then develop an action plan for training. Get a report, hire a firm that can go in, do a report, and then start your training. After you get a report, you do a strategic plan. You engage in intentional efforts to communicate the organizational culture that you are trying to commit to and to convey, and you incorporate that into each and every person's performance review and professional development plan. But you start with asking the questions and not making assumptions. And you get those answers anonymously, if necessary, from the people in your organization. But please don't start with training, because I deliver trainings. I'd love for you to start with me, but don't start with training that's unidentified, because the best training aimed at the wrong target is no training at all. So start with, let somebody come in, hire someone, not me, but hire someone to come in and do the analysis, do the research, and put on paper what your organizational culture really is, not what you put in your mission statement or your vision statement. What's really going on here? What do the employees say? What do the exit interviews say? What does the retention of BIPOC employees tell me? Do they stay shorter, longer? Do they get promoted? Look at your hiring and promotion practices. In other words, do the research and then make the shifts that are necessary. And some of the shifts, even at the board of directors level, might include making some C-suite changes, and that's okay. That's okay.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with our distinguished panelists. I'm just overwhelmed by the support that not only the panelists are receiving in the chat, but also that the participants are giving one another. One of the things that I think that really hit home with so many people of color in particular was the disenfranchised grief, and just being thankful that there's actually a name put to the loss that many people experience in that space. And I mean, just in terms of the empathy that you brought, President Hudson, many people are very thankful for that. Very thankful for President Butler in being authentic and embracing showing up with your authentic self, well as you, President Nunez, really being authentic and telling your story. And then, of course, Vice President Johnson, they really loved the video that you had to offer to bring a visual to the perspective of sharing this space. So sadly to say, it's very unfortunate that we do have to bring this dynamic session to an end. We've had an amazing time to engage with phenomenal, and I'm going to say this one more time, phenomenal. I'm going to say it, wait a minute, for a third time, phenomenal panelists, and connect with our participants. During our time together, we were able to build a safe space for a collective and collaborative community. Once again, I would like to thank our panelists for allowing us the opportunity to learn from their experiences and expertise. So my hope is that this session has inspired many of you to take a few pearls of their wisdom in implementing inclusive leadership practices by addressing emotional and structural barriers within your own workplace. So goodbye for now, and thank you once again to our panelists and to our participants. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.